Does it seem that others are the ones who come up with the best ideas? Why can't you be the one that uncovers that killer idea? You can. I'll be right back.
This is the Killer Innovations Podcast with Phil McKinney. Keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are Phil's, and Phil's alone, and they don't necessarily reflect those of his past, current, or future employers. Now, here's Phil McKinney.
As part of our continuing series on the podcast, this week's show is on ideation. Before we talk about the killer innovation methodology for creating killer ideas, let's take a little bit of a walk back through the current methodologies that are out there and what some of the challenges they create. Let's think back to the typical brainstorming sessions that we've been either involved in or ones that we have run ourselves. Now, the typical brainstorming session begins with a simple question. Let's create some new product ideas. Let's develop some differentiators for this product. Now, what's the challenge with these methodologies? When you ask simple questions, you get simple answers. Now, what happens during one of these typical sessions? You go off, you get 10 of your brightest and smartest people, you stick them in the room, you give them the challenge. Create some new product ideas. Someone raises their hand and says, hold on, I'll be the scribe, I'll write everything down. You start off the session, you put the question up, people start coming up with ideas, the scribe furiously writes them down, and then you see that people typically hit the idea wall. Why? Because you've asked a simple question. The human brain operates that once the question is answered, we stop looking beyond that. So if you ask a simple question, soon as the brain realizes or thinks that it's answered the question, it stops. It has a hard time going beyond the obvious answers. Now, even when you ask those simple questions, you may get a series of ideas. Someone scribbles them down. Someone raises their hand and says, I'll send out the email out to everybody with all these ideas. And then what happens? Nothing. Why? Because you're not convinced that you've come up with the best idea. The methodology for the killer innovation approach is that if you ask better questions, you get better ideas. In fact, I would argue that with the right set of questions, you can come up with killer ideas. Now, the questioning methodology is not really new. It's based on Socrates or the Socratic method of asking questions. The basic fundamental precept of the Socratic method is that you continue to ask questions such that the best answer is the one that remains. You ask a series of well-structured questions that lead you to an obvious answer, and by structuring the right set of questions, you come out with the best answer. Whether that answer is what should I have for breakfast, to where should we go on vacation, to let's go off and create a new breakthrough business model for the company that I work for. So what are the right questions? Now, in the case of the killer innovation methodology, the questions that were created are based on what I would call a reverse innovation approach. We went off and we looked at a whole series of very successful ideas, and then basically backed up and developed the questions that would have led you to the breakthrough of that innovation. Now, what we found was a pattern of questions that actually became fairly common across these wide range and wide sets of innovations. And it wasn't limited to just high technology. We looked at business models, different geographies, different approaches, different outcomes, whether it be products or services or technologies or strategies to expand into new geographies, a wide range. The end result is 75 questions that are now in the deck, and the deck continues to get bigger. New questions are uncovered. And in fact, through the process of recording this podcast and sharing with all of you, I've been able to actually develop more questions based on your feedback. Now, you'll typically find that there are two types of questions in the killer innovation methodology. One is what I would call single stage questions. These are questions that actually get you into the process of generating ideas, such as, what fad could I incorporate into my product today? So you think about the fads, you start applying it to your product. The other is what I would call two-stage questions. In this case, you ask a question, you document the information, and then you come back and develop ideas around those answers. One example is, what do customers don't like about buying my product? So you sit down, list all of the barriers or all of the issues you've heard from customers, or you go out and you observe customers buying your product and document everything that the customers do not like about buying your product, whether it be long sales lines at the retail outlet, poorly educated salespeople, long time from the time they order till they get the product, whatever the case might be. Once you've listed all those things, then you come back in a second stage, and for each one of those barriers, you run a session around creating those killer ideas that fundamentally change that experience from a negative to a positive. So that just being one example. So again, single stage questions or two stage questions. Now the other challenge you have is being able to structure these questions around the areas that you want to innovate. Now, in the last session, we talked about focus. What are the areas of focus that you're going to put around your innovations, the ideation sessions that you're going to run? Once you pick that area of focus, now you can create a series of questions or take the set of questions from the deck and go after and create killer ideas. So for example, if you have new or existing customers, if that's the area of your innovation focus, some of the questions would be things like, what emotional, psychological, or status benefit could people derive from using the product or service? Another would be, how can you create a social or group experience with the product? So again, this is about going after new and existing customers. Another example is let's say the focus area for you is around industry structure. Some of the questions you might ask would be, what are some of the basic assumptions under which the industry operates? Or another example would be, what external jolts have the potential to significantly impact the operational rules of the industry? Maybe your other option or another area of focus that you're thinking about is product or services innovation. You want to go off and create a new product or create a new service. Some of the questions you might ask yourself is, who uses the product because of some benefit we did not foresee? Or what regular used makeshifts can we capture in a product design? So as you can see, these are not just the basic questions of going off and creating a new product or let's go off and restructure the industry. These questions are worded very specifically to force you to get beyond the obvious, force you to look at both the negatives and positives of your current product, negatives and positives of outside influences, and structure a series of questions that allow the people that are participating in your ideation session to uncover those things that they probably have inside of them, but haven't had a mechanism to verbalize it. When you ask the right question, you will get the best answers. Now, one of the things I've learned over the years of running these workshops and getting organizations up to speed and using these methodologies is the wording on the questions can be very, very specific. They're very important. Changing the word could potentially change the entire outcome of the sessions. So, if you're using questions and you're constructing questions, be very conscious of the meanings of words, the structure of the words, and not to limit the words in the form of being a constraint on the ideas that get generated. Now, in many cases, when you're in the ideation session, you're going to run into a roadblock. How do you get beyond the obvious? How do you kind of see the session and everybody's coming up with kind of the same ideas and you're running into kind of the wall after a certain amount of time where you're not getting the fresh new ideas? There's a lot of methodologies that are out there, and I would encourage you to go out and look at things like, whack on the side of the head and thinker toolkits and those kinds of things, and use those methodologies in the sessions around killer questions to create the killer ideas. One that I have found particularly useful is one called Scamper. Now, Scamper is just basically a word that helps keep you in mind of the different steps that you can run through. So the S in this case stands for substitute. Take the idea and substitute something else in the idea. So if you've gone through a series of questions. You've come up with this list of ideas. Go back through the ideas and take an element of an idea and substitute something else in it. Think about what else you could put into that idea, changing it and coming up with a completely new idea. The other is combine, and actually combine is probably my favorite. What I will typically do in combine is I'll take a piece of graph paper. I will list down the ideas across the left-hand side. I will list the ideas also across the horizontal. I will look towards the intersections and come up with entirely new ideas. So, one example would be something like, we're going to create new kinds of mobile phone services for going to restaurants. The other example would be, let's go off and create location-based services. So why not combine mobile services for restaurants, location-based services, and create something totally new? Now, I know that's kind of a lame example because it's already out there, but just trying to give you a feel for, take the list of your ideas, make them vertical on a piece of paper, take the same list of ideas, make them horizontal on a piece of paper, on a grid, where at each intersection, take the two ideas, combine them up, and come up with something totally new. And what you'll find is this will force you to have to fill in the entire grid and then go back and circle the ones that have the most promise. And what you tend to find is it's never a single idea that wins. It's the combination of ideas or taking an idea and adding something to it. Now, going back to Scamper, other ideas would be adapt for A, M is for modify or magnify, P is to put it to other uses, E is to eliminate or minimize, and R is to reverse. Take the exact opposite of the idea and see where that leads you. Now, one of the key areas that you've got to think about is what I would call idea quotas. If you let a group loose and just say, hey, 30 minutes, come up with the best list of ideas that you can come up with, they're going to go for about 20 minutes of that, hit a wall, and be stuck. I am a big believer of setting idea quotas. So, for an average 30-minute ideation session, which is about the maximum time that you're going to have people really focused on just cranking ideas, for 30 minutes, each person should be able to come up with 45 ideas. Some organizations can go as high as 60 or 70 ideas. 45 should be about the minimum. And what you find is out of that 45 ideas, the first third of the quota will be the easiest. It's going to be the most obvious. The second third will typically be extensions of the first third. The final third will be the hardest ideas, yet typically contain the kernel of a killer innovation. And in some cases, that final third may come out of things like running Scamper, doing a combine, doing other things to look back to the original ideas and look at those unique combinations. The key here is always fill the quota. Even if the ideas seem far-fetched, if they're outlandish, if they're crazy, fill the idea. And the best ideas come to those teams that really work at it. Be 100% committed to getting the best ideas and meeting the idea quota. Over my experience, there are certain characteristics that lead to the best killer ideas. Now, the first off is having a purpose. The purpose yields the best ideas based on the fact that there's a clear business objective and there's a business sponsor. If you're just putting people in the room to say, come up with the new ideas, and there's really not a call to action from the senior executive, you don't have the support, teams are not really assured that if they come up with the best idea that there's actually going to lead to anything, why do it? People are going to become discouraged. They're not going to be interested. When I run workshops, what I require from the senior executives is a dollar commitment, $50,000, $100,000, that says that the best idea is going to get this funding and is going to be able to go out and actually do some market research, validate the idea, and look at the overall market opportunity and build the business case. If management is not willing to commit those kinds of dollars to those sessions, all we do is we train our people to go out there, go through the motions, but they're not going to put their best ideas forward. Why? Because nothing ever comes of it. Next is timeliness. The difference between a great idea and a so-so idea is the timing in the marketplace. Is it the right time for this idea? If it's a tech idea, is it the right cycle for the technology? Lots of really good ideas never see the light of day or never make it into the market because it's the wrong timing. Do you have a mechanism that puts those ideas on the shelf and comes back to those later? Once you pass over an idea, it doesn't mean it's a good idea. Come back to it later. The key there is get the timing right. If you miss the timing, you could have the best idea, but you're going to have a market failure. Next, diversity. The pool of contributors needs to be broader, much broader than you would ever think. When I'm talking about diversity, I'm talking about people at different levels of the organization, different experience levels in their jobs, different backgrounds on where they were raised. Are you using all of Americans, or are you using diversity of geography where people are raised, each coming with a different perspective? The key here, though, is that diversity needs to be at all levels. Different level of executives, different geographic backgrounds, different socioeconomics, how people were raised, different education levels, different experiences with the customers. Diversity is what brings the richness of ideas and actually allows for people to get together and contribute ideas, to come up with better ideas by combining their perspectives. Next is perspective change. The best ideas come from those individuals who can look at things in a different way. Observation and the ability to change your perspective is something that is unique. It is something you can learn, but you need to practice it. And you need to do this through the process of looking at ideas that have been successful and how did the person look at that differently. On your team, you need to find people who are skilled or who have done this successfully, and then make sure you've got at least a couple of those people on your team. The ability to change your perspective is key. Otherwise, you get a room full of people and they look at the problem the exact same way. And last but not least is you need to create an environment where collaboration is key. It's not about who came up with the idea. It's about taking that as a starting point and then combining up ideas such that the overall organization takes ownership for it. It's not about who came up with the idea. It's about building a culture that says, take this idea, build upon it, improve it, put your own fingerprints on it, and take ownership for it and move the ball forward. The hardest part within an organization that I've run into, and I can go through all of the rules of an ideation session about don't criticize, don't attack. If you have an issue with an idea, always try to add to the idea rather than criticize. Look at combining your thoughts with another idea to make the idea better. Always focus on contributing. All the rules that we've all heard about. However, the hardest thing that organizations typically run into when you've got a motion of trying to drive innovation in an organization is suspending disbelief. We always run into the historical perspective. It's things like, we've already tried it. I thought of that a long time ago, but, I went through, there's no way that we could ever make that happen. We can't afford that. You'll never get approval. You're on the wrong track. Don't waste our time. It won't fit into our operation. It's against all of our logic about how we make business decisions. There's not enough return on investment. The market's not ready. Who's going to do it? I don't have enough budget. I don't have headcount. Who's going to go off and do this idea? The key here is how you get an organization to suspend disbelief. And this goes back to securing executive management support. It is absolutely key that managers stand up, take on their leadership role, and support the innovators within their organization. If management's not willing to stand up, then they're not committed to the innovation revolution. They're not committed to winning and being successful in the creative economy. They're stuck in the old economy and not willing to make the investments and make the change necessary to support the innovators. So the key here is going into an ideation session and killing ideas is not only do you need a methodology and the right questions and the focus and those kinds of things, but you also need management support. You need to know that you're going to invest this time, you're going to get the people to come up with their best ideas, and the best idea is going to have some funding, and they're going to be able to see that product or service or new geography or a new supply chain or a new marketing campaign, whatever the area of innovation is, that's going to have a killer impact on your organization to be able to see the light of day. People who are committed to innovation, their motivation is different. The motivation for us is, yes, we all have our motivations, but one of the key fundamental motivations that I have found is seeing the idea become a reality. To have that pride, to step back and say, I was part of that team that came up with that idea, that resulted in this new marketing campaign, that came up with this new service or this new product. And it's management and leadership's role to make sure that those innovators have the sandbox to make it happen. Thanks for listening to this week's podcast. This is another installment as we move forward to the Killer Innovation CD, a single CD that contains the high-level overview of the overall Killer Innovation podcast and methodology. Please send your feedback. Please send it by email at podcast@killerinnovations.com. You can also post your comments to the blog, which is over at killerinnovations.com, where also we have the show notes. Feel free to link our networks together. Feel free to contact me. You can contact me at Skype at Phil_McKinney. You can also link to me on Facebook. I'm there as an individual. There's also a Killer Innovations show group where you can link up with other listeners of the podcast. You can also connect with me via LinkedIn. Please let me know that you're a listener to the podcast. I get lots of requests, whether it be Skype or Facebook or LinkedIn, and I typically only accept those from listeners. So if you're a listener to the podcast, let me know and I'll accept your invite. Also, pay it forward. If you've been a regular listener to the podcast, you know the motivation for why I do this. I received some great mentorship early in my career, and the mentor that I had, Bob Davis, the only requirement he had was that I was to pay it forward later in my career. And I'm finding that this podcast is turning out to be a great forum for me to make friends, make connections, but also to pay it forward. So my ask for you is pay it forward. Also, don't forget to vote for your favorite podcast. It's a way of letting the producers of your favorite content that you truly do appreciate the time and money they put into producing all the podcasts you listen to. You can vote over at Dig, Podcast Alley, Podcast Pickle. So why don't you take a few moments right now, go over, vote, post your comments, and let others know that you truly do appreciate all the content that you listen to on all the podcasts that you download. I'm collecting listener questions for upcoming podcasts. Once we get through the CD tracks, we'll be going back to the normal podcast structure. And I'm looking to collect listener questions you might have about your own experience in creating or running a Killer Innovation session, of getting senior managers to understand the role of innovation, getting funding, getting budget approval for ideas, all the challenges you've run into. Send them to me as questions. I will collect those up and we'll be answering those in a future podcast. So send those to me at podcast@killerinnovations.com. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this week's podcast. I truly do appreciate the time out of your busy schedule to listen to me. Hopefully it's beneficial for you. Let me know. I love hearing from you. I love hearing about your questions. And if there's anything I can do to help you out, drop me an email and I'll try to respond. I may be a little slow at times, but I do try to catch up on all the emails. But I love hearing your comments and your thoughts about the podcast. And we'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.